In this lesson, we're going to be looking at types of evolution. So, the dot point in the VCA study design talks about biological change over time, including divergent evolution, convergent evolution, and mass extinctions. So we're looking at this in greater detail. So, in order for a species to evolve, you have to have the following things. We need to have a variation in their inherited traits or variation in the population. All species must produce more offspring than their environment can support, but most fail to do so. Organisms or individuals with inherited traits, they have a higher probability of surviving and reproducing in an even environment. They leave more offspring than other individuals. But the unequal survival will lead to the accumulation of favourable traits in the population over generations. So through this process of evolution, there are 2 or 3 subcategories. The first of which is divergent evolution. That's where we have one related species split or become into 2 new species, and they share homologous features, which means they have features that come from a common ancestor, and now they do different functions, but they have very similar structures. The results of divergent evolution is because of selection pressures. So, for example, we have a common ancestor which gave rise to the modern elephant and the woolly mammoth. You can look at an ancestral species here, and that will diverge or split into 2, and therefore create species A, which will then split again into species B and C over time. The other type of divergent evolution, a specific subset or sub-example, is adaptive radiation. That's where we have a rapid, very quick, very large divergent evolution of a large number of species from a common ancestor. And that's due to different selection pressures. So if we look here between Australia and Central America, there are a number of different organisms which have diverged or come from the same common ancestors. A more specific example of this, there are a number of different types of these beetles, all living in this one location. However, they're in different environments. Some live here on the coast, some live more inland, and as a result, they have different structural features. So adaptive radiation is just divergent evolution, but on a much larger scale, and it's due to vast differences in environments, which means there's vast difference in selection pressures for those organisms. Convergent evolution we looked at briefly. That's when 2 unrelated species converge and they become more similar with their features, which are analogous. So the shark, the penguin, and the dolphin are all unrelated species in the most recent past. They do not share a recent common ancestor. However, they all have similar structures of their fins, their wings, or their flippers, and that's because they have similar selection pressures in similar environments or slightly different environments which are resulted or selected for these particular features. So divergent, splitting from a common ancestor, and convergent, converging or becoming more related, but still a separate species. Another type of evolution is called coevolution. This is where we talk about related species or species that interact with each other to experience similar environmental conditions and pressure each other. So for example, the crab will eat the snail, and the crab will, as a result, eat snails which have softer shells. So the snails which have softer shells will die, whereas the snails which have harder shells will survive more often because they'll be selected for. Now, these crabs, the ones that will survive now, will be the ones that can eat or can break the harder shell snails. So over time, we have 2 species evolving, harder shells being formed, larger claws and more powerful claws being formed in order to break the food that they need to eat. Over here, we've got a particular type of flower. The flower will develop pollen in order to reproduce, and the butterfly has a proboscis in order to fertilize or ascertain the pollen from the flower. The flower will gain more pollen, or the flower with certain structures will be able to fertilize better from the butterfly, and that butterfly will survive better. These are other examples of organisms which have adapted to fertilize that particular flower. The mass extinctions. We've looked at various types of evolution. Species may fail to adapt to environmental change, and that's because of their inability to match the selection pressures. That may be due to limited resources and dying out. And on a large scale, mass extinctions have followed disruptive changes to things like global climate or loss of sea or land. So over time, there have been a number of mass extinctions in the scale of the Earth. You don't need to know these mass extinctions, but you need to be able to aware that mass extinctions have resulted because of limited resources. This is what you should be able to do now. We're looking at types of evolution, so convergent, divergent, coevolution, and adaptive radiation as a subset of divergent, and mass extinction, what it means. These are the terms. This is its criteria, being able to explain divergent, convergent, coevolution, and mass extinctions. Thanks for watching.